Donald Trump has been criticised by the Democrats and Republicans for saying laws around abortion should be decided by individual states. But in an increasingly polarised America, isn't decentralization the very answer that we will all be considering? Hello there, you awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage to truth, discovery, and mutual awakening. If you click on the link in the description, you will be supporting our community. You'll be a member of a thriving movement that is opposed to establishment corruption. You get an additional video every week. You get to join me live for conversations. We meditate together. We've got a book club. There's all sorts on offer. Isn't it curious that Donald Trump has outraged almost everyone by saying that abortion laws ought be left to individual states? Do you not agree that decentralization and moving power closer to the people affected by it has to be the solution, not with just regard to a contentious issue like abortion, around which women's rights arguments coalesce and former taxonomies such as the left and the right appear to find fissure and opposition, but all decisions. Generally speaking, shouldn't democracy be as close as possible to the people affected by the decisions that are made? Conversely, isn't it terrifying when we discover that decisions are made by people who will not be affected by the decisions that they make? So, we'll look for a moment about the ever-contentious issue of abortion, but we will examine more closely the idea of federalization or decentralization, or the ability of states or even smaller communities to determine how their money is spent, how they are governed, how they commune and communicate, how their judiciary is constructed, because surely in a polarized culture, the divestment of power is necessary.
It was supposed to be Donald Trump's clarifying statement on abortion, a 4-minute video released on his Truth social media platform.
Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others.
The former president and presumptive Republican nominee stopping well short of endorsing what many of his supporters are calling for, a national ban, saying each state should have its own laws.
At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people.
Polls show the majority of Americans support access to abortion. Trump is effectively endorsing a patchwork of state bans and laws that have emerged since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a court decision that had given women the right to abortions across America for decades.
Like Ronald Reagan, I am strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. You must follow your heart of this issue.
The abortion debate.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who supports a nationwide 15-week ban, said he respectfully disagrees with Trump. In a video posted to X, President Biden responded directly to Trump's statement.
Donald Trump is the reason Roe's ended. If you reelect me, I'll be the reason why it's restored.
Two campaigns digging in deeper in what could be a defining issue in this year's election.
Even from that short, relatively neutral news report, you can see that this is a divisive issue. Many people will have a spiritual position on a subject like abortion and the sanctity of human life. Other people will have their own perspective based on personal experience. Doesn't that in itself illustrate the necessity for a variety of potential solutions, not just with regard to the contentious topic of abortion, but more broadly when it comes to the investment of resources and the types of laws that a community might agree to? Isn't centralization always going to lead to division and polarization? Here's a curious moment from the Bill Maher show, where British pundit Piers Morgan and Bill Maher discuss what the meaning of abortion is. We're all going to have strong views on abortion, aren't we? Because ultimately, human life is sacred. Ultimately, bodily autonomy on a variety of issues now is continually being discussed. Let's see where this issue takes Piers Morgan and Bill Maher, while we ourselves address whether or not you agree with universal laws one way or the other, or the maximum amount of representation in your community.
Actually, there are many countries in Europe where it's completely illegal to have an abortion. Poland, Malta, places like Andorra, so, and if you look at Germany and France and countries like that, it can be 10, 12 weeks is the term limit that you're allowed to have an abortion legally. So America is not such an outlier. If it does go to the States, I think a lot of Americans on the left do think that this is somehow a really unique American problem, or an issue that only pertains to them in terms of the legality of abortions. Actually, comparative to Europe, it's not massively dissimilar.
But the thing that's crazy is, at a time when America is facing so many huge geopolitical threats,
where there's a huge tech revolution going on, where the economy is faced with all kinds of challenges, the idea that you're fighting an election around this issue seems to be, just strange. Back to the 19th century.
Well, not if you believe it's murder. That's why I don't understand the 15-week thing. Or Trump's plan is, let's leave it to the states. You mean, so killing babies is okay in some states? Like, I can respect the absolutist position. I really can. I scold the left on when they say, oh, you know what? They just hate women. People who aren't pro-life, pro-choice. They don't hate women. They just made that up. They think it's murder. And it kind of is. I'm just okay with that. I am. I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. I'm sorry, we won't miss you. That's my position on it. What?
Bill Maher there, astonishing his own audience. And I suppose what we have in the subject of abortion is the necessity of confronting what we mean when we talk about rights, when we talk about humanity, when we talk about life. In a sense, it's such a fundamental ontological question, such an important spiritual question. What is life? What are our duties and rights over life? That it's odd that it's become determined by secular ideas like the left versus the right. I suppose one might argue that life begins at the moment of conception, when there is a flash of life, when there is the potential for a human life to unfold from that moment forth. And in a sense, what Bill Maher is saying is extremely interesting. He respects absolutists. The aspect of this subject that I've always found fascinating when I've spoken to people who have strong pro-choice views is that by entering into the discourse, we are mutually acknowledging that we are discussing something profound and significant. I.e., if you see a bunch of protesters outside a family planning or abortion clinic, again, depending on what terminology you prefer, it's not the same as having your toenails cut. It's not just cellular matter. We're talking about the sanctity of life. We're talking about consciousness. We're talking about humanity. I suppose where I arrive is at the point of decentralization, at the point of federalization, at the point of individual freedom and the ability of communities to set their own guidelines and laws, precisely because of the complexity and because when it comes to spirituality, I have my own beliefs. But what are the beliefs that you feel so strongly that you are willing to impose them on others, that you are willing to say, I believe so strongly? Now, a lot of people will say, now, well, murder. Let's say, we're all saying that murder of a realized adult human is wrong. We don't have problems with that. But I suppose there are subcategories of self-defense. The state commits murder. The state commits murder in war. The state annihilates entire populations, if they can frame it correctly. So even with a subject like homicide, there are variations, degrees, vicissitudes, and qualifications. So with a subject like terminating a human life at some point whilst gestating, it's likely that there will be variation. And in fact, that doesn't need to be stated because we can see that from the political and cultural landscape. There's endless variation, as Piers Morgan said. Across Europe, there's variation. Across the United States of America, there's variation. And what's plain to me is that politicians from both sides of the political aisle mobilize this subject in order to create an emotional response and to stoke division and benefit from polarization, knowing that there are certain demographics that will always vote in one direction and others that will always oppose them. And then, as the other pundit on Bill Maher said, we won't think about economic issues and issues of power and issues of war and issues of centralizing authoritarianism. Thank God for our commercial partners. They make our life better, and particularly in the case of True Lean's Everyday Wellness, which is an all-natural 9-in-1 powder that boosts immune health, reduces inflammation, promotes gut health, including vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin B12, zinc, turmeric, and echinacea. Is a potion of pure wonder. Everyday wellness, backed by science, inspired by Mother Nature herself. All you got to do is stir these sachets into water and enjoy. Unless you've got one of these glorious big bags. Look, this is like the parent. There it's sort of like cells that are within it. There it's infants, it's tadpoles, as it were. Control your health without prescription. Take that, Big Pharma.
We beat Pharma this year!
I'm feeling better already, and I can just feel Pfizer's stock price plummeting. Spicy citrus tastes like sipping on sunshine. Let me have a sip of that sunshine. The inner light of the Lord is shining from within me. You can visit truelean.com, code BRAND25 for 25% off. Use the code BRAND25, get 25% off. They'll know we work. I tell you what it feels like. It's spicy. It gives you a zing. It's life itself. Now, I'm sorry, my brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles in Europe, this is only available in the United States of America. If you get some of this, if you don't feel the benefit within 30 days, Truelean will buy it back from you. Even if the bag's empty, you can send them this empty bag. You could even put something in there. I don't know, a stool, a rabbit's paw. They'll give you your money back. That's how confident they are in this product. Try everyday wellness for yourself today. You deserve it. Truelean.com. Use the code BRAND25 for 25% off. Let them know I sent you. It works well for us. God, this stuff's delicious. I can't get enough of it, but then I have an addictive personality. Let's get back to the content. The reason that I am fascinated by this subject is not because I believe all life to be sacred, but I recognize and have experience of the complexity that's likely to come into people's lives around that subject, but in fact because of how we try to create systems based on principles that are difficult to understand if you have solely a material, rational, and secular perspective on life. If you say there is no God, there is no truth, there is no justice, there is no righteousness, we're born, we die, that's life, this is just a cluster of cells. If it's inconvenient to a person, they should be able to make whatever choices they want to make. Like, that is a perspective that people have. Of course it is, and people are entitled to have that perspective. Then from where do you undergird the rights of an individual? Because you're suggesting that there is some sanctity to the rights that we all have as individuals. In a sense, this issue, with how it functions in opposition to centralized power, demonstrates that all of us, on some level, believe that life is sacred. Either we believe that the life of babies is sacred from the point of conception, or the life of an individual is sacred and no one should intervene in the free will of that individual, and they have absolute jurisdiction over their bodies and any potential inhabitants of their bodies. That, in a sense, is a recognition by both sides that there is something in life that is sacred and that all of us want our own individual sovereignty. Both of those positions, in a sense, indicate that centralized authority will never work. That will always generate a degree of polarization. And indeed, is that part of the point? Are both systems in a two-party but ultimately uni-party system benefiting from the ability to generate polarization around certain issues that mean that we can't think straight when it comes to a whole variety of issues in which we might have more power and more control?
That's quite harsh, Bill.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not
Is
sure
that not your position if you're pro-choice?
Isn't that mainly because you don't like children? I mean,
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
no. I mean, but if you said you're pro-choice. That's your position too.
Of course, let me know in the chat and the comments how you feel about the subject of abortion, your individual bodily authority and your right to regulate the bodies of others, or where you stand on the principle of termination and murder and the sanctity of life and all of the complexity that comes together in that subject. And when you eventually are forced to acknowledge the impossibility of some centralized rule, let's consider federalization and decentralization. Now, this is Chris Edwards from the Cato Institute. The problem with the federal government is that it has amassed such huge power over our lives that people get bitter when their side in the presidential race loses. Federal intervention in education, healthcare, housing, welfare, and many other economic and social areas has made people fear that the next president will impose policies they detest and view as harmful to their communities. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen Joe Biden as passionate as when he was pointing and snarling about Roe v. Wade, right?
Donald Trump is the reason Roe's ended. If you re-elect me, I'll be the reason why it's restored.
So obviously there is a degree of polarization, oppositionism, mobilization of tribalism in order to generate some gusto in a campaign that could be seen as what these two parties... The rise in federal spending and regulatory power has deepened anger and partisan divisions by trying to force policy conformity on a very diverse country. The federal government tries to impose one-size-fits-all policies on the nation when there is no national consensus. Federalism expert John Kincaid noted regarding federal intervention into state and local affairs, it is the root cause of polarization because it has nationalized so many issues, especially sensitive social and cultural issues such as abortion and education that were previously diffused across the 50-state political arenas. The cooperative federalism advanced by the nationalist school of federalism requires a national consensus on such issues, but there is no consensus. Requiring state electorates to implement sometimes hotly contested national policies appears to have considerably exacerbated national conflict in ways that threaten the institutional fibre of the Republic. As Washington has further encroached on properly state, local, and private activities over the decades, the share of people who trust the federal government has plunged from more than 60% in the 1960s to less than 20% today. So whatever your perspective is on this issue, you don't trust the state on this issue. Doesn't that suggest that we have to, where possible, devolve and decentralize power? Isn't that indeed the underlying message of diffuse communication systems that are ubiquitous and fully immersive, specifically social media? Our ability now to communicate immediately, directly, to vote on a variety of issues, isn't that what we're avoiding addressing in order ultimately to preserve sets of hierarchies and institutions that benefit from corralling people together in populations of hundreds of millions, keeping us in a state of conflict when in fact we could just be going, well, this tribe over here seems to live this way, and that tribe over there lives that way. In short, the way that we lived for millions of years. Americans have grown less happy with the federal government, even as the number of federal programs ostensibly created to serve them has increased. That's odd, isn't it? So there's more social care, the American government's getting bigger and bigger, and people are less and less happy. What does that mean? As a 2019 Cato Institute study discusses, the solution is to decentralize power by ending federal programs in state and local policy areas. Polls show that the large majority of Americans prefer state rather than federal control over education, housing, transportation, welfare, healthcare, and other activities. Growing federal power has undermined democracy, community, diversity, and political goodwill. It is a cancer on American governance, and in the years ahead, there will be no suspension of partisan anger unless federal power is reduced. It may seem paradoxical, but the way to unite the nation and bring Americans together is to disunite power and disperse it out of Washington. So, oddly, according to this analysis, Donald Trump is right. The issue of abortion ought be left to the smallest measurable community. I mean, if you want individual choice, that's the smallest unit of governance. But if there are communities that have views, oughtn't there be some, I don't know, representative and democratic process within that community that establishes their laws? And if you don't agree with that, then I suppose you don't agree with democracy. Here's some advocacy for the principle of federalization and decentralization. When government is closer to the people, it is more likely to be held accountable by them for its successes and failures in the provision of basic services, the maintenance of order, and the fair resolution of local issues and disputes. Government tends to be more responsive when it is closer to the people. That is why democracies are more and more embracing the principle of subsidiarity. The principle, but the practice, I don't know. I think we could do with a little more of it, because I'm seeing a lot of centralized authoritarianism when it comes to censorship, when it comes to surveillance, when it comes to imposing laws that have, for example, come from a WHO treaty or from the EU or from the centralized US government, and it's not working. And actually it is working, but it's not working for you. It's working. If you centralize power, then you can be of better service, can't you, I suppose, to the interests that you really work for, because you've centralized all of that power and all of those resources, and you're able to pass laws that benefit, for example, the military-industrial complex or the pharmaceutical industry, whereas if the whole state of Texas, Florida, California, pick a state, we're able to say, we're not doing that, now you're no longer able to serve your true masters with the same utility and efficiency. That each government function should be performed by the lowest level of government that is capable of performing that function effectively. Sounds like a good principle. When there are multiple layers of elected government, as in a federal or politically decentralized system, there are other benefits for democracy. Lower levels of elective office can constitute an arena for training and recruiting new political leaders. Imagine schools, hospitals, police forces, military units, all governed as locally as possible. Imagine businesses, corporations run by the people that work there. Imagine Amazon, not centralized absolutely, but every warehouse, every distribution center democratically run. What a terrifying idea for the elite class. And these lower levels of democracy provide a more accessible means for citizens to become active in public affairs, to question their local officials, monitor what they do, present their interests and concerns, and learn the skills and values of democratic citizenship. Most of us think that democracy is pointless because it doesn't matter who you vote for, you're going to get the same sort of thing, except on the key hot button issues like gun control or abortion or whatever it is that they're using to control you right now. In fact, what it should be is, I'm just going to go and talk to this person and say, listen, I think this. Well, let's see what wins in the marketplace of ideas. Typically, it's difficult for most citizens and organised groups to get access to the national parliament or the central ministries. They need decentralised opportunities for access to decision-making power, and those points of local access are more likely to be responsive if they are accountable to the people through elections. Now, what I've experienced in my limited involvement in such communities is everything really slows down because you have to listen to absolutely everybody, and not everyone's as eloquent, and not everyone speaks so quickly, and not everyone can convey their ideas as well, but everyone has a voice and everyone has a right. So one of the key driving unconscious modalities of our entire culture, now I'm not talking about left and right, is progressivism. The idea that we're progressing. We used to be cavemen, don't you know? We was dumbasses. Unless, of course, there were lost and forgotten civilizations. And we're progressing to the point where we can colonize Mars and technology will solve all of our problems. Well, what if that's not true? What if we should slow down a little bit and get in touch with the earth and get in touch with one another and get in touch with what we're actually doing? Maybe we should see it as an expansion out into conscious awareness rather than a telos towards some imaginary future where everything is sanitized and Apple Mac neat. Finally, decentralization of power provides an additional check against the abuse of power, of course, because it's immediate, local, and intercommunicative and responsive. Now, the obvious downside, it appears, is the potential for decentralization to lead to disintegration. A very legitimate fear of many who are wary of federalism is that in a context of deep ethnic and regional divisions, it can lead to the breakup of the country, as in the former Soviet Union or the former Yugoslavia. These fears are real, but they are based on a mistaken reading of other experiences. Divided countries have disintegrated at crucial moments precisely because they did not develop over time democratic means for the devolution of power that knitted groups together in more authentic, voluntary, and legitimate political union. When groups are held together in one nation mainly by force and fear, anxious minorities may seek to secede at the first sign of a weakening of central government power. By contrast, when the national government, under the fresh political circumstances that attend the formation of a new democratic system, makes an early and sincere grant of autonomy, the consequence is almost always greater stability and unity rather than secession. So in a sense, the argument that's being presented here is either voluntarily the systems, elites and institutions that benefit from centralization cede that power and allow people to run their own communities. I think the benefits of such an idea and approach is actually demonstrated through the abortion issue, or it will lead to what many people fear America's on the precipice of: mass conflagration, confrontation, and indeed civil war. Now, maybe this is just a media device to create yet more tension and polarization and fear and dread, but it's pretty obvious, isn't it, that after the next election, it's not going to be, well, the best man won, well done, is it? It's going to be, no, you stole the ballots, it's corrupt. Well, you did an insurrection. Well, you did a Russiagate. Maybe what we're experiencing is the failure to acknowledge a deeper truth and a deeper reality, which we can see playing out on technological planes right before our eyes. The ability to communicate, the ability to have democracies. And I feel that perhaps if we look to our history, the idea that we might live in tribes that organize themselves around their own cultures and their own principles, that seems to be a pretty good template. It doesn't solve all of the problems in the world, but let's remember, we're not competing with an absolutely perfect model, are we? We are addressing the fact that we appear to be in a time of massive cultural, ecological, geopolitical, financial, and environmental crisis. And no one trusts one another anymore, and no one trusts any of these institutions precisely because of the reasons outlined here in these series of articles and demonstrated both in the Bill Maher piece and Donald Trump's casual suggestion that states should decide for themselves how to determine these issues. Wherever you stand on the issue of abortion, perhaps you will humor me further by looking into the idea of federalization, decentralization, because all it actually means is the maximum amount of power possible for you as an individual and your community. And if you really believe in representative democracy, if you really believe in yourself, then surely this is a solution we should all be considering together rather than endlessly increasing polarization and conflict. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments in the chat? Remember, become a member of our community. You get an exclusive video every week. You join us for live conversation. We do a book club where we read spiritual books and we even meditate together. We are trying our best to build something exactly along these lines. More important than any of that, if you can, please stay free.